The sun had barely begun to rise over the city of Lagos, but the compound of Kingdom Reign International Ministry was already alive with noise and anticipation. A sea of followers, dressed in vibrant Ankara prints and flowing lace garments, pressed against the gates, eyes glistening with hope. The sick came on crutches, the barren clutched at their bellies, and the desperate whispered fervent prayers into the air. At the center of it all, elevated above the crowd, stood a stage bathed in gold and white. Behind it, a massive LED screen flashed the words. "The solution is here. The man of God has spoken." Then, as if on cue, the hush fell. The choir stopped. Even the wind stilled. And out he came. Prophet Patrick. The solution pastor. Clad in a flowing white robe embroidered with golden flames, he walked slowly onto the stage, hands lifted, face turned toward the heavens. 1,000 camera lenses zoomed in. Worshippers collapsed under the weight of their own emotions, shouting, "Papa! Papa! The Oracle of Jehovah!" He smiled. Controlled. Calculated. Charismatic. Children of the Most High, his voice boomed, confident and smooth like silk drenched in honey. "The Lord has shown me your pain, your trials, your captivity. But today," he paused, "today is the day of solution." Applause erupted like thunder. Behind the stage curtain, the team scrambled. Makeup artists retouched his brow with a dabbing sponge. A junior assistant whispered updates in his ear. The prayer line had swelled to over 100. The media team confirmed that over 1 million viewers were tuned in live online. "Call out the first case," Prophet Patrick commanded. They brought forward an old man in a wheelchair. Eyes glazed, legs lifeless, voice barely a whisper. "My son," the prophet said, laying his hand gently on the man's head, "your legs are not your problem. It is the curse from your mother's bloodline." The crowd gasped. The man's daughter began weeping uncontrollably. "It's true. My grandmother was a witch." Patrick closed his eyes, swaying gently. "I see, 3 snakes, wrapped around your legs. But today they shall burn in the fire of God." He placed both hands on the old man's knees, muttered in tongues, and shouted, "Rise in the name of Jesus." The man trembled. He struggled. Then, before the eyes of thousands, he stood. The crowd exploded. People leapt into the air. Some fainted. The cameras captured every tear, every scream of joy. But backstage, just behind the curtain, in the shadows where lights didn't reach, stood a boy. Thin. Dusty. No older than 10. He clutched a sealed brown envelope in both hands, trembling. A security guard shoved him. "Hey! You can't be here." The boy didn't speak. He only pointed to the envelope. Written on the front, in shaky ink. "To Prophet Patrick, urgent. From Mom Nkechi." The name caught the guard's attention. He frowned and took the envelope, flipping it over. "Mom Nkechi? Isn't that the woman?"
"Who?" The boy was already gone. That night, the prophet's private chamber was quieter than usual. Incense burned in gold pots shaped like angels. The walls were lined with portraits of him with presidents, celebrities, and international bishops. A large lion rug sprawled beneath his marble desk. He sat in his velvet throne, legs crossed, sipping fine wine. Ruth, the newest assistant, stood by the bookshelf sorting through archived testimonies. He held the brown envelope now. Staring at it. Hands still. The name, Mom Nkechi, was a ghost from another life. One he had buried deep beneath polished shoes and holy oil. He opened it. Inside, a letter. Handwritten. "Patrick, you said God had cleansed you. You said we would be protected. But my daughter is dead. You told me it was God's will, but I have the proof now. I have the truth. I know what happened in ABA. What you did. And if you don't come see me within 7 days, I will tell the world." No signature. No greeting. Just a single photograph folded inside, a girl in a hospital bed, pale, eyes closed, with a thick scar running across her chest. Prophet Patrick dropped the envelope. The room felt colder. He stood up, pacing. He poured more wine. He looked at Ruth, who hadn't noticed anything. Or so he thought. "Ruth," he said suddenly, voice sharp. She jumped. "Yes, sir?" "You are dismissed. Go home. Be ready for tomorrow's crusade." "Yes, Papa." As she gathered her things, she glanced at the envelope on the floor, just for a second too long. The name Mom and Ketchy stuck in her mind. That night, the prophet didn't sleep. He sat before his altar, rocking back and forth, whispering prayers under his breath. "God, they cannot know. Not now. Not when the ministry is growing. Not when the nations are watching." He opened his Bible, searching for solace. But every verse felt like a curse. In the stillness, a voice echoed in his ears, not divine, but real, human, and female. "You can't bury your past forever, Patrick." He turned. No one was there. Just shadows dancing on the wall. And behind the shadows, something darker waited. 12 years earlier, ABA, southeastern Nigeria. The rain fell in sheets, drumming against corrugated iron roofs, turning red dust roads into rivers of mud. Streetlights flickered in and out. The smell of burning kerosene, sweat, and desperation filled the narrow alleyways of Nkwo Market. Amid the chaos, a younger Patrick stumbled out of a dilapidated storefront church, barefoot, his threadbare shirt soaked and clinging to his bony chest. "God is not listening," he shouted into the sky, his voice cracking from exhaustion and hunger. "I have fasted. I have prayed. I've slept on this altar for weeks, but nothing." The few passers-by ignored him. They had their own crosses to carry. He sank to the steps of the church, head in his hands, stomach growling, feet bleeding from days of walking and preaching without rest. He had left home at 19. He had seen visions, or at least he thought he had. He could quote scripture backward and forward. But every time he opened his mouth to preach, people walked away. He was just another poor boy with a Bible. Until that night. Inside the empty church, as he lit the last candle at the altar, a tall figure entered through the side door. The man wore an all-black suit, his shoes spotless despite the rain. His presence was magnetic, almost unnatural. Patrick turned, startled. "I'm sorry, sir." "We've closed," Patrick said, his voice timid. The man smiled faintly. "I've come to help you. I've watched you, Patrick. I know what you desire." Patrick blinked. You know me?" The man walked forward, his footsteps making no sound. "You want to be seen. Heard. Respected. You want the power to change your life, and the lives of others." "Yes." Patrick's voice trembled. "But it's like heaven is silent. Maybe heaven isn't your only option." The stranger reached into his coat and pulled out a single book, leather-bound, with no title, and placed it on the altar. "This book will show you how to make the people listen. How to draw them. How to make them believe. But once you open it, there is no turning back." Patrick hesitated. Is this from God?" The man gave a small, airy chuckle. "Power is neither good nor evil, Patrick. It only becomes what you use it for." He left without another word, disappearing into the rain. Patrick stood there alone, the book glowing faintly under the candlelight. 1 month later. The church was full. People sat on benches, stood at the back, and even spilled outside, peering through windows. Something had changed. Prophet Patrick, yes, he now called himself that, no longer trembled when he preached. His voice was rich, commanding. He called out names of strangers, told them about dreams they had never shared. He laid hands and people fell, shaking and sobbing. A child with a clubbed foot walked. A barren woman screamed she was pregnant. He smiled. humble, holy. But his eyes burned with a new fire. Behind the pulpit, the black book always rested, half hidden under his Bible. His fame spread beyond ABA. Soon, buses began arriving from Owerri, Port Harcourt, and Onitsha. He moved the church to a bigger hall, then another, then bought land. And every Sunday, people testified. And donated. Healed and gave. Saved and sowed seeds. But some came and didn't return. Some asked questions, and were never seen again. One of them was a girl named Adiz. Adiz was 16. Her mother, Mom Nkechi, brought her to the Prophet when she developed seizures no hospital could cure. Patrick prayed over her with fervor. Claimed she had the spirit of ancestral attack. Told Mom Nkechi to leave her at the church for spiritual cleansing. 3 days only, he said. And your daughter shall be whole. But on the 4th day, when Mom Nkechi returned, she was told Adiz had been taken to a private retreat center. She's in deep recovery, the assistant pastor said. The spirit is working. For weeks, she wasn't allowed to see her daughter. Then came the news. Adiz had died. The official report said she collapsed in prayer. That her spirit was too weak for the fire. But Mom Nkechi knew her child. And what they buried didn't look like her daughter. The scars. The bruises. The silence. She never stopped searching. Never stopped watching. Years later, she would find a nurse who worked at that retreat center. A woman who gave her a photograph. A timeline. A whispered warning. Whatever Prophet Patrick did to your daughter, it wasn't holy. Present day, Lagos. Prophet Patrick stood before the mirror in his mansion's prayer room, staring at his reflection. 12 years. 12 years of power, fame, wealth, and unshakable influence. He had outgrown ABA. Built a megachurch in Lagos. Acquired media stations, healing centers, and political allies. He was no longer Patrick the beggar preacher. He was the solution pastor. The voice of nations. The hand of God. And yet. That letter. That picture. Adiz's lifeless eyes stared back at him through memory. His fingers clenched the sink. He could not let it all fall now. A soft knock on the door. It was Ruth. Sir, your interview with CNN Africa is in 30 minutes. They want to highlight your prophecy about the elections. I'm not doing it, he snapped. She blinked. But the crew. I said cancel it. His voice echoed through the chamber. Ruth left quickly. But the moment the door shut, her expression changed. She wasn't just an assistant. She was also a daughter. A daughter of a woman who once walked with Prophet Patrick in ABA. And she remembered everything. Ruth had learned long ago how to keep her face still, her voice calm, and her emotions hidden behind layers of practiced obedience. Papa wants his tea. Papa wants silence. Papa wants the limo in 5. She was always there, soft-spoken, composed, wearing long skirts and veils to maintain the ministry's image of holiness. But every day she walked through the gilded doors of Kingdom Reign International Ministry, her heart burned with unspoken questions. And now, with that envelope from Mom Nkechi, the questions were louder than ever. 8 years earlier in ABA. She remembered the first time she saw Prophet Patrick. Her mother had dragged her through the muddy streets to the crowded crusade ground, gripping a bottle of anointing oil and whispering, "This man is the Moses of our generation. He can see what others cannot." Ruth, only 16, had rolled her eyes. She believed in God, yes, but this new wave of miracles, screaming, and rolling on the ground didn't sit well with her. Yet when Patrick stepped onto the stage that night, the air shifted. He didn't just speak, he possessed the atmosphere. "There is a girl here," he had declared. "Her name starts with R. She has a scar on her left shoulder from a fire when she was 5. The devil has marked her. But tonight, Jehovah will unmark her." The crowd gasped. Her mother wept. It was Ruth. He was right. Every word. She couldn't explain how. She remembered trembling as he called her forward. His hand on her head. The smell of his perfume, a mix of frankincense and something more exotic. He whispered something she never repeated to anyone. You have the sight too. But you're afraid. When the time comes, you'll serve something greater. Present day, Lagos. Ruth sat in the media room of the megachurch, watching old footage of the ABA days. The camera zoomed in on Patrick's face as he preached to a crowd of hundreds in a dusty field. No lights. No choir. No fame. Just fire. She paused the footage. There was something raw in his eyes back then. Desperate, almost vulnerable. Not like the Patrick of today, groomed, polished, revered like a god. She minimized the footage and opened a hidden folder she had been curating for the past year. Folder name, The Truth. It contained screenshots, testimonies, news articles, and voice recordings from people who had once believed, and then suffered. There was the woman who claimed she lost her savings after being told to sow a seed of $10,000 for healing that never came. The young man who said he worked security for the prophet and was fired for asking why a supposedly healed blind man was spotted wearing glasses a week later. And of course, Mom Nkechi, whose pain had started everything. Ruth clicked record on her phone and whispered. Day 311. He's hiding something. That envelope shook him. The past is scratching at his door. I have to find out what really happened to Adiz before he buries it again. She saved the file and closed the folder. Meanwhile, private suite, Lekki. Prophet Patrick sat alone in a darkened room, the walls covered in flat-screen monitors streaming live footage from the church, the choir rehearsing, ushers arranging chairs, the auditorium's gold pulpit gleaming under spotlights. He had built an empire of miracles. But empires had enemies. And shadows. He lit a cigar, something no one was allowed to know about, and leaned back. His phone rang. The screen flashed, Deacon Alicia. Patrick answered with one word, speak. Sir, it's the woman. Mom Nkechi. She's been talking again. Patrick's eyes narrowed. To who? A journalist. Investigative. American. From Truthstream Network. They're planning a documentary. A long silence. Then Patrick chuckled softly. Then we silence her, before her voice becomes a storm. Later that night. Mom Nkechi walked home through the quiet streets of Ikorodu, holding her handbag close. She had just left the Truthstream Network guest house, where she had recorded a full interview. Her spirit felt lighter for the first time in years. I'm not afraid anymore, she muttered to herself. Let the world know what he did. She reached her gate and fumbled with her keys. Just as she pushed it open, a dark figure stepped out from behind the tree. Good evening, madam. She froze. Who are you? She asked, heart pounding. The man smiled, but his eyes were dead. The prophet sends his regards. Then came the blow. The next morning. Social media exploded. Breaking, whistleblower Mom Nkechi survives brutal attack. In critical condition at City General Hospital. Ruth dropped her phone. She knew. She knew it wasn't random. And she also knew one thing. She couldn't be silent anymore. The walls were white, sterile, and humming faintly with the buzz of machines. Mom Nkechi lay unconscious, her head bandaged, tubes weaving in and out of her frail body. Outside her room stood 2 uniformed officers and a nurse, jotting notes with urgency. Ruth stood at the window, her breath fogging the glass. She had come straight from the church, still wearing her ministry name badge. Her hands were cold, but her heart was colder. Fear and fury clashed in her chest like a storm. The prophet sends his regards. Those words rang louder than any sermon she had ever heard. She looked over at the officer nearest to her. Can she speak? He shook his head. She went into cardiac arrest shortly after arrival. Stable now, but still unconscious. Ruth swallowed hard. Her stomach churned. She wanted to scream, to expose him right there and then, but the truth was, she had no real proof. Just whispers. Just pain. She needed more. Kingdom Reign International Ministry, Main Auditorium. The atmosphere was electric. Thousands of worshippers filled the grand cathedral, their hands raised in worship, their voices rising in reverence. Crystal chandeliers hung overhead, and a golden eagle stood perched atop the altar, symbol of the ministry's dominion. Prophet Patrick strode into the sanctuary like royalty. Clad in a pure white suit embroidered with gold threads, he walked slowly, deliberately, soaking in the adoration of the crowd. "Daddy is here. Bless us, Papa. Speak, Oracle." He stepped up to the pulpit and lifted his hands. Silence fell like a blanket. "The Spirit of God woke me at 3 a.m. and said to me, 'My servant, danger is near. But I will fight your battles.'" The crowd roared. "There are wolves in sheep's clothing trying to bring down this altar. But God shall expose them. Fire will consume them. Fire! Fire!" the audience chanted. Ruth, watching from backstage, felt sick. He knew. He knew someone was watching him. And he was using the pulpit to do what he always did: manipulate the narrative before the truth could speak for itself. She walked away before he finished. She had a mission. Using a key she had quietly duplicated, Ruth slipped into the records room. It was an expansive, chilled chamber filled with dusty file cabinets, locked drawers, and boxes labeled with dates and tithing records. But she wasn't looking for finances. She was looking for retreat records. It was common knowledge that chosen members were sometimes sent to the Mountain of Renewal, a secretive retreat center owned by the ministry, far from public view. Most returned with testimonies. But some didn't return at all. She found a dusty red file marked 2013 Mountain Intake List. Her eyes scanned quickly until she saw it. Adiz Kemikanam, age, 16, intake, April 4, 2013. Discharge status, transferred, no signature. No discharge address. No next of kin notified. Ruth's heart raced. She snapped a picture of the page and stuffed the file back. She turned to leave, and froze. Someone was watching her. She could feel it. The door creaked slightly behind her. She spun around. But no one was there. Prophet Patrick stood beside a team of well-dressed church executives, smiling for the cameras. A new expansion project was being unveiled, the Kingdom Reign Healing Resort, a multi-million-dollar facility dedicated to restoring mind, body, and soul. Cameras flashed. Applause filled the air. Ruth stood in the back, holding a microphone, posing as media personnel for the church's broadcast unit. But inside her blazer pocket was a small USB flash drive. It contained every file she had collected: audio recordings, images, a voice note from a former driver who once claimed to have picked up a bleeding girl from the retreat center at night. She texted an encrypted message to TruthStream Network. "It's time. Let's meet. I have everything." She hit send. And immediately, her phone buzzed with a call. Unknown number. She answered cautiously. "Hello?" The voice was low. Male. Nigerian accent, but foreign inflected. "If you value your life, delete the message. Stop digging. You don't know who you're dealing with." Then silence. She stood frozen, her breath caught in her throat. She wasn't paranoid. She was being watched. Patrick sat at his ornate mahogany desk, swirling a glass of red wine, his face unreadable. His assistant entered. "Sir, the reporter, from TruthStream. She's landed in Lagos. Her name is Kim Park." Patrick nodded slowly. "Bring her to the healing resort. Tell her I will grant her a private interview. Let her believe she's gaining access." The assistant hesitated. "And the girl? Ruth?" She's loyal. The assistant didn't speak. Patrick stared at a framed photo on his desk, a group picture from the early church in ABA. In the corner stood Adise. Smiling. Innocent. He turned the frame face down. A sleek black SUV cruised through the dusty bends of the long, isolated road. Inside, Kim Park sat with her camera bag and a notebook on her lap, eyes darting out the window at the looming trees. She had covered scandals across Asia and South America, but nothing about this story sat easy in her spirit. She had read every whisper, every suppressed blog, and watched testimonies that would never see mainstream airtime. And yet, here she was, headed straight into the lion's den. The driver, a man with tribal marks and no smile, didn't speak. His only words had been, "The prophet is expecting you." Kingdom Rain Healing Resort, Outer Compound. Hidden deep within the forest, the resort was massive, a secluded complex made of high walls, pristine gardens, and buildings lined with white marble and stained glass. Birds chirped. Wind rustled leaves. It looked like paradise. Kim was escorted into a luxurious guest room. No phones. No internet. Just a Bible, a cross on the wall, and silence. An assistant smiled tightly. "You'll meet the prophet after evening devotion. You're welcome to observe the grounds in the meantime." Kim nodded politely, but her investigative instincts buzzed. This place was a fortress. And something was very wrong. Meanwhile, back in Lagos, Ruth stared at her phone. The message from TruthStream had delivered. "Kim's inside. We'll extract her in 48 hours. Hold tight." But 48 hours felt too long. She knew the resort. She had been there once. Its beauty was a veil. Behind its flower-lined fences, things happened, things whispered about by former workers who disappeared after talking too much. She opened a burner email and sent a message to an old contact. To emmanuelokoro44@protonmail.com. Subject, urgent. Message, you once said you saw what happened to Adise. I need proof. She's alive, isn't she? She hit send, prayed it wouldn't bounce. Then she packed a bag. She was going in. Inside the healing resort, nightfall. Kim followed a quiet group of healing interns to the central prayer chamber, a circular room with floor cushions, incense burning, and a massive throne-like chair at the far end. Every movement, every glance, felt choreographed. The prophet entered. No cameras allowed. Patrick's white robe shimmered as he moved barefoot into the room. His eyes landed on Kim, and he smiled, charming, warm, but hollow. Welcome, Mississippi Park. You came seeking truth? She nodded. Yes, prophet. Truth, and healing. He motioned for her to sit near him. The others bowed their heads. God speaks in many ways, he said softly. But only the chosen understand his language. You are one of them. Kim maintained eye contact. How do you know? Because you came to me. She wanted to press him. To ask about Adise. About the alleged abuses. About the financial trails. But now wasn't the time. She needed to survive the night. Back in Lagos, Ruth's apartment. A reply came. From emmanuelokoro44@protonmail.com. Subject, urgent. Message. I saw them take her to the room of silence. She was bleeding. They said it was deliverance. But she screamed until she stopped. I left the next day. I can't confirm if she died. But I know they buried something behind the eastern wall. Ruth read it over and over. Her skin turned cold. The room of silence. It was real. And buried behind the wall. She packed gloves, a flashlight, and her phone. Kim wandered the eastern gardens with one of the interns, a soft-spoken girl named Ijeoma who walked with a limp. Did you choose to be here? Kim asked gently. Ijeoma flinched but nodded. We're chosen. The prophet sees into our souls. He heals us. Does he hurt you? Ijeoma looked around. Her voice dropped. Pain is part of the healing. You can't be born again without dying a little. Kim's heart twisted. She recognized cult-like language when she heard it. But before she could ask more, 2 guards appeared behind them. Interview time. Patrick sat across from Kim, sipping mint tea. You know, he began, I admire your courage. But I must warn you, truth is a double-edged sword. It frees, but it also wounds. Kim hit record on her device. So let's begin. Go ahead. She leaned forward. Where is Adis Kemikanam? The prophet smiled, slow and chilling. Ah. The ghost. He folded his hands. People die every day, Mississippi Park. Some spiritually. Some physically. But not every corpse is buried. Kim didn't move. Are you saying she's dead? I'm saying you should be careful where you dig. Then he stood and walked away. That night, the eastern wall. Ruth slipped into the compound under the cover of night, using a retired staff badge she had held on to for years. The grounds were silent, the air thick with dew. She reached the eastern wall, covered in jasmine vines and prayer plaques. She began to dig. Hands shaking. Fingers bleeding. And then, wood. Rotten, buried deep. She pulled it free. Inside was a tattered cloth, red-stained. A girl's bracelet. And a small, rusted tag. Adis. Her stomach flipped. She grabbed her phone and snapped photos, evidence. Suddenly, a flashlight hit her face. Hey! Guards. She ran. The escape. She didn't stop to think, only ran through the maze of hedges and buildings until she reached the old staff quarters. She kicked open the side door. And there, sitting calmly in the shadow. Kim. They stared at each other. Ruth? Kim breathed. How? No time, Ruth whispered. I have what you need. But we need to leave. Now. Footsteps thundered down the hall. They grabbed hands and bolted into the night. The air felt suffocating as Ruth and Kim sprinted through the darkened corridors of the staff wing. Their footsteps echoed through the empty hallways, an urgency propelling them forward. Behind them, the sound of guards shouting grew fainter as they pushed through a small, back door into the dense underbrush. The trees and shrubbery swallowed them whole, the moonlight barely peeking through the thick canopy above. Ruth's heart pounded like a drum, adrenaline coursing through her veins as she glanced back over her shoulder. They couldn't afford to stop. Not now. Kim was breathing heavily beside her, gripping Ruth's arm tightly. Where are we going? Kim gasped, struggling to keep pace. Ruth didn't slow down. There's a network. We need to get to Lagos, fast. Once we're out of this perimeter, I know a way to the city. Kim nodded, her face pale. You've got the photos, right? Ruth dug into her bag and pulled out her phone, clutching it protectively. I've got everything. They kept moving, each step a race against the inevitable. As they neared the edge of the forest, Ruth could hear the distant hum of engines, the sound of search teams sweeping through the resort. But it was too late for them to turn back. They had everything they needed. The safe house was tucked away in a quiet, residential part of Lagos, an unassuming building with reinforced windows and high-tech security. Ruth had arranged for a hacker from TruthStream to meet them there, and she was certain that their pursuit was inevitable. But for now, they had a brief moment of respite. Inside, Kim collapsed onto a couch, her breath still ragged from the sprint. She grabbed the glass of water Ruth offered her but couldn't quite hide the anxious edge in her eyes. You were right, Kim said, her voice barely above a whisper. This place, it's a cult, Ruth. They're hiding more than just the truth. They're hiding bodies. Ruth didn't respond at first. She was busy scanning through the photos on her phone, proof of the hidden grave. A photo of the rusted tag, the bracelet, and Adis's name. These images would be the key to exposing everything. The hacker arrived a few moments later, a young man named Tund, his face lit with the glow of his laptop screen. "I've encrypted the files, Ruth. This goes live in an hour, as promised," he said, sitting at the makeshift desk in the corner. "But you know what's at stake here. If the Prophet's people catch wind of this, they'll come after us." Ruth nodded grimly. "I know. But we have to do it. This man, Patrick, he's using his so-called miracles to control people. To kill them, if necessary. We can't let him get away with it." Kim leaned forward, her voice determined. "The world needs to know. People are dying in the name of faith. We need to expose everything." Tun tapped a few keys on his laptop, his face illuminated by the blue light. "Give me the word. I'll hit publish." Ruth hesitated for just a moment. She knew the gravity of what they were about to do. This wasn't just about a journalist exposing a corrupt prophet. This was about risking everything to bring a man's empire of lies crashing down. Kim met her eyes, her voice steady. "Do it." Tund clicked the button. The screen flickered once, then went dark. The prophet sat at his desk, reviewing the latest sermon materials. His office was immaculate, each item perfectly placed. The golden eagle statue gleamed in the light as he sifted through documents. His mind was sharp, always 3 steps ahead of anyone who dared to challenge him. But suddenly, a sharp, ear-splitting sound cut through the stillness of his office, the sound of his phone vibrating violently. Patrick glanced down at the screen. It was a news notification. His fingers hesitated on the screen as the headline flashed before his eyes. "Prophet Patrick exposed, cult, murder, and corruption revealed." He swiped the notification away quickly, his expression unreadable, but inside, his heart raced. He knew it was coming. The walls he had so carefully constructed over the years were starting to crack. He stood up abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor. "No. This will not stand." Within minutes of Ruth and Kim's exposé going live, TruthStream Network servers were flooded with traffic. Thousands of viewers tuned in, sharing the video on social media platforms as fast as their fingers could type. The world was watching. Kim's face appeared on the screen as the camera zoomed in on her, her voice trembling with emotion as she spoke directly to the camera. "My name is Kim Park, and I'm a journalist who has uncovered the dark, dangerous truth behind the so-called Prophet Patrick, the Solution Pastor. For years, he has claimed to perform miracles, heal the sick, and deliver blessings to the faithful. But behind his golden facade lies a twisted web of lies, abuse, etc." Her face was hard to read, but her voice carried the weight of years of investigation. Ruth's footage, the photos of the grave site, the recorded testimonies, all played on the screen, revealing the grim reality of what had been happening inside the Kingdom Reign ministry. Patrick's so-called retreats are not healing centers. They are sites of torture. And his so-called deliverances are nothing more than controlled executions, carried out in the name of salvation. As the footage rolled, viewers were given an inside look at the compound, the buried bodies, and the horrifying stories from former members who had escaped. Kim's eyes glistened with determination as she ended her statement. "This is not just a story. This is a cry for help. It's time for Prophet Patrick's reign to end." Kingdom Reign International Ministry, The Storm. Patrick stood before the congregation as news of the exposé spread like wildfire. He had called an emergency meeting, his voice rising above the murmurs of confusion and fear. "My children," he began, his voice deceptively calm, "there is a great attack against this ministry. The enemy is using lies to try and bring us down. But I tell you, God will fight for us. Do not believe what you have heard." But the tension was palpable. Even the most devout among the congregation could feel it, the undercurrent of doubt that had never been there before. Patrick's gaze scanned the room, his eyes cold and calculating. He knew they were coming for him. Ruth collapsed onto her bed, her body exhausted but her mind racing. The exposé was live. The world now knew. She had done it. She had exposed Patrick's lies. But as she stared at the ceiling, one thought consumed her: what would he do next? Patrick wasn't just a man. He was a monster, cloaked in the guise of a prophet. And monsters didn't die quietly. She closed her eyes and prayed, for herself, for Kim, and for everyone who had ever suffered at the hands of the so-called solution pastor. The city of Lagos had not been kind to the prophet's lies. The day after the exposé aired, the streets buzzed with whispers of disbelief and outrage. Social media erupted with viral posts, some calling for justice, others mourning the lost souls who had fallen victim to Patrick's teachings. The hashtag expose the solution pastor trended worldwide, filling the airwaves with anger and demand for accountability. Ruth sat in a small cafe, scrolling through endless news updates. Her phone buzzed incessantly as notifications poured in from reporters, law enforcement, and even ordinary citizens. The firestorm they had unleashed was now raging out of control. Kim was sitting across from her, her expression a mixture of relief and anxiety. They had done the right thing, but the fallout was unpredictable. She rubbed her temples, still processing the trauma of the last 24 hours. "How do you feel?" Ruth asked, leaning forward. Kim met her gaze. "Like I've opened a door that can't be closed. There's no going back now. Patrick's empire is crumbling, but what if he's not done yet?" Ruth couldn't answer. Her instincts told her that the prophet was far from finished. He was cunning, calculating, and desperate. The cracks in his carefully constructed world had widened, but he still had power that had been amassed through years of manipulation, deceit, and fear. "We have to keep going," Ruth said finally. "We can't stop until every last truth is exposed." Kim nodded. "What's next?" The once grandiose sanctuary of Patrick's ministry was now a shell of its former self. The golden altar was no longer bathed in soft light, but in the harsh glare of media cameras and flashing lights. Protesters had gathered outside, chanting for justice, demanding that Patrick face the consequences of his crimes. Inside, the atmosphere was tense. The prophet sat in a private room at the back of the church, his face obscured in the shadows. His mind raced, his thoughts swirling with fury and disbelief. How had it come to this? His once devoted followers were now turning on him, calling him a fraud, a killer. The door creaked open. One of his closest aides, a man named Chike, entered with a grim expression. "Prophet," Chike said softly. "We've lost control. The media is relentless. The authorities are breathing down our necks. People are saying they'll start marching to the compound to hold you accountable." Patrick's eyes darkened as he clenched his fists. He had never imagined this would happen. "Get them to stop the march. I will not have my name dragged through the mud by ungrateful fools." Chike hesitated. "The followers are starting to question you, prophet. Some are asking for their money back. Some are leaving." Patrick's face twisted into a sneer. "They are weak, Chike. All of them. I am their salvation. They need me." But deep down, Patrick knew that this wasn't just about control. It was about survival. His empire had been built on the very lies that were now threatening to tear it apart. And he would do anything to stop that from happening. "Make sure the guards are ready. I want everyone to believe this is an attack. If anyone comes near, I want them to know we will fight back." Safe house, Ruth and Kim's plan. Back at the safe house, Ruth and Kim gathered around a small table littered with documents, maps, and notes. Ruth had reached out to her contacts in law enforcement, and the information they had gathered was damning. There was enough evidence to put Patrick behind bars for a long time, but the process was slow, and the system was corrupt. The prophet's followers had deep pockets, and some of them wielded influence. Kim flipped through a stack of papers, her fingers shaking as she pulled out a photo of a lavish mansion in a remote area on the outskirts of Lagos. "This is his estate," she said. "It's where he's been hiding for the last few days. We need to get in there. The authorities are still trying to figure out how to bring him in, But if we get proof of what's happening inside, we can force them to act. Ruth's heart raced as she studied the photo. Are you sure? Kim's eyes narrowed. We have no choice. If we want to end this, we need to expose everything. I'm not going to let him escape. This is the only chance we have. Ruth hesitated for a moment, then nodded. I'll get the team ready. We'll move tonight. As night fell, Ruth and Kim, along with a small group of trusted allies, made their way toward the sprawling estate. The mansion sat like a fortress, surrounded by high walls and armed guards patrolling the perimeter. The air was thick with tension, but they knew they had no other choice. They couldn't wait for the authorities to act. Ruth's heart pounded in her chest as she surveyed the estate from behind a nearby building. Kim stood next to her, clutching a set of infrared goggles. Are you sure you're ready for this? Ruth asked. Kim didn't respond immediately. Instead, she took a deep breath and nodded. I've come this far. We finish what we started. They made their way toward the mansion, moving quietly and staying in the shadows. The estate was lavish, its marble floors and gold trim mocking the very victims who had been lured in with false promises of salvation. Ruth and Kim reached the front door, where they paused to listen for any signs of activity inside. The house was eerily quiet, but Ruth had learned to trust her instincts. They were not alone. The door creaked open slowly, and they stepped inside. Inside the mansion, confrontation. The air inside the mansion was heavy with the scent of incense. The walls were adorned with portraits of Prophet Patrick, his face framed by the golden light of his self-made aura. But tonight, that aura was dimming. Ruth's voice was a whisper as she motioned for Kim to stay close. We need to find evidence of the illegal activities, anything that ties him directly to the murders, the brainwashing, the financial exploitation. Kim nodded, pulling out a small flashlight. We'll find it. He's hiding something. I can feel it. As they moved deeper into the mansion, they heard a door creak open ahead. The unmistakable sound of a man's voice reached them. You think you've won, Ruth? You think you've exposed me? You are nothing but a pawn in this game. Ruth froze. The voice was unmistakable. It was Patrick. Kim and Ruth exchanged a look. They had to confront him. There was no turning back now. Confrontation with the prophet. Patrick stood at the end of the hallway, his back turned to them. He was surrounded by his most loyal followers, their faces grim and set with determination. You shouldn't have come, Ruth, he said, his voice low and dangerous. You've crossed a line that you can never uncross. Ruth stood tall, her heart thundering in her chest. You're done, Patrick. Your empire is falling. It's time for the world to see you for what you really are. Patrick turned to face her, his eyes burning with fury. You have no idea who you're dealing with. I am the solution. I am God's messenger. Kim stepped forward. You are nothing more than a liar and a killer. It ends tonight. As Ruth reached for her phone to call for backup, the tension in the room reached its breaking point. Patrick's followers moved to surround them. The final battle for the truth had begun, the tension in the air was palpable. Patrick stood before Ruth and Kim, a man transformed. The cold, calculating prophet they had once known had now become a desperate, cornered beast. His eyes blazed with fury, but beneath that rage was an unmistakable fear of the end of his empire. Behind him, his loyal followers, who had once hung on his every word, now stood motionless, unsure of their allegiance. The spell he had cast over them was beginning to unravel. They could sense the truth, everything Ruth and Kim had exposed was real, and it was no longer easy to ignore. Patrick's voice rang out in the stillness. You think you can destroy me with your lies? I am untouchable. I built this kingdom with my own hands. I've healed the sick, delivered the broken. You are nothing but fools. Ruth stepped forward, her hand steady as she held up her phone. On the screen, a live broadcast was playing, showing footage of the bodies they had discovered in the compound, the testimonies of survivors who had escaped the prophet's grasp. She held it up for Patrick to see. "You built this on lies, Patrick." "On blood," Ruth said, her voice unwavering. "And it ends now. The world knows the truth." Patrick's face twisted with anger. "You think the world will care? They will still flock to me. I am the solution. I am the only one who can save them." Kim's voice was sharp and resolute. "No, you're not. You never were. You're a fraud, a murderer." The room grew tense as the followers shifted uneasily, some stepping back, others whispering to one another. The walls that Patrick had built around them were crumbling. They were beginning to see him for what he truly was. Patrick's eyes darted around the room. His followers, the people who had once been his weapons, were now potential threats. Desperation gripped him. He raised his hand in a commanding gesture, and the followers hesitated. Some of them were still loyal, but doubt was spreading like wildfire. "This is a test," Patrick growled, his voice hoarse. "Those who are truly faithful will stand by me. You will all see, God is with me. You think you can stop me? The world will bow to me, just as they always have." But as he spoke, his words no longer carried the weight they once did. The believers in the room exchanged glances, and Ruth could see the cracks in their devotion. Some were already turning away, taking hesitant steps back. Ruth knew this was the moment they had been waiting for. Breaking the spell, the prophet's downfall. Kim stepped forward again, her voice now loud and clear. "You've fooled them for so long, Patrick. But the truth has come for you. And there's no place for you to hide anymore." Patrick's eyes burned with defiance, but even as he opened his mouth to retaliate, the sound of sirens wailed in the distance, growing louder by the second. The authorities were closing in. The world was about to watch his empire come crashing down. Patrick's face twisted in horror. His once steady confidence faltered as he realized he was no longer the one in control. He was being exposed, not just by Ruth and Kim, but by the inevitable forces of justice that had now surrounded him. "This is not the end," Patrick shouted, his voice desperate. "I will not be defeated by you." But his words rang hollow in the air. The followers who had stood by him for so long, some with tears in their eyes, now turned to leave. Their loyalty had been shattered, and there was nothing left to hold them captive. In the chaos of the moment, Ruth felt a surge of vindication. But even as the truth was unveiled, she knew it wasn't over. Patrick had wreaked havoc on so many lives, and bringing him down was just the beginning. The arrival of justice. The doors of the mansion burst open, and a team of law enforcement officers stormed inside. Ruth had arranged for the authorities to act once the exposure went live. Their swift response was the final nail in Patrick's coffin. The officers quickly apprehended Patrick, though not without resistance. His followers had abandoned him, and now, there was nothing left to protect him. As Patrick was handcuffed and led out of the mansion, he screamed, his voice filled with venom. "You will regret this, all of you. I will rise again. You cannot defeat me." But his threats were drowned out by the sound of the sirens and the murmurs of the crowd that had gathered outside. The once mighty prophet was now nothing more than a man being dragged away in shame, his empire of lies crumbling around him. Ruth and Kim stood in the background, their faces set with determination. They had done it. They had exposed the man who had terrorized so many under the guise of salvation. Weeks passed, and the aftermath of the exposé continued to unfold. News outlets covered the story, and the world was shocked by the extent of Patrick's deception. His followers, once loyal to him, now found themselves grappling with the truth, some of them seeking therapy, some trying to rebuild their shattered lives. Ruth had spent the following weeks working with the authorities, helping victims who had been manipulated and harmed by Patrick's actions. She had helped put together a network of support for those who had escaped the cult-like ministry, and her investigative work had earned her praise from the public and law enforcement alike. Kim was by her side through it all, her own role in the exposé cementing her reputation as a courageous journalist. The two of them had gone through hell together, but they had come out the other side stronger, knowing they had brought justice to countless people. But even as the world began to move on, Ruth couldn't shake the feeling that there was still more to the story. Patrick's fall had been swift, but it was just the beginning of a much larger reckoning. The underbelly of corrupt faith ministries, the lives ruined by false prophets, they were still out there, and Ruth knew she couldn't stop. She had uncovered the darkness in one man, but the light was still dimming in so many others. As Ruth walked down the streets of Lagos, her phone buzzed with a new message. It was a tip. There was another prophet, another ministry, and Ruth's instincts told her that this one was even more dangerous than the last. She didn't hesitate. Her work was far from done.